and bringing out what I've called the elephants in the room. So bringing out these kind of aspects which a lot of mediators don't touch, don't go to. So it was really like bringing in these elements which are seen as taboo, or maybe even seen as unconscious because they're there, but we don't think about them.
That's Katrina Abatis describing the approach of mediator Zaza Johnson Elsheikh and her skill in bringing cultural considerations to the forefront of conflict resolution. Katrina is a senior program officer in the Mediation Support Team at the Center for Security Studies, it's a CSS, which is a think tank at ETH Zürich. Katrina is the author of the paper which will be featured in this episode, Inviting the Elephant into the Room, Culturally Oriented Mediation and Peace Practice, in the framework of the Culture and Religion and Mediation Program, a joint project between the CSS and the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs. We're also joined by Zaza Johnson Elsheikh, a commercial, family, and workplace mediator who has almost 20 years' experience of mediating shareholder disputes in family businesses and inheritance disputes, as well as the reconciliation of complex families. Zaza's mediation work draws upon her experience as a medical doctor and a clinical negligence solicitor before she became a member of the Center for Effective Dispute Resolution faculty. Zaza teaches conflict resolution skills to both mainstream and neurodiverse adults and children in schools and at top universities in the UK. As president of Belief in Mediation and Arbitration, Zaza leads bimonthly scripture-based dialogue sessions, for example, Scriptural Guidance on responding to toxic conflicts. Zaza is also recognized as a Muslim faith leader and has a particular interest in working with vulnerable people of all ages who are susceptible to radicalization and extremism. I'm your host, Warren Hoffman, and in this episode of Conflict, Power, and Persuasion, Katrina and Zaza describe the concept of culturally oriented mediation. This approach became apparent to Katrina through Zaza's sometimes unconventional mediation practices, which she found necessary to effectively address complex cultural disputes in her community and beyond. As you listen to Zaza's experiences and Katrina's insightful analysis, I invite you to consider how culture might be underpinning and amplifying the conflicts that you engage with, and the ways you might develop your competency in cultural conflict to effectively bring the elephant into the room, so to speak. Some topics discussed include distinguishing between culturally sensitive and culturally oriented mediation approaches, understanding the manifestations of shame-triggered violence in conflict, employing active impartiality and hardcore persuasion to engage conflicting parties, exploring gender differences and promoting peace, resolving conflict, unconventional approaches for creating proactive entry points for peace, addressing how cultural differences can lead to mismatched expectations, the urgent need for addressing sexual violence against refugees, the evolving role of culturally oriented mediation in an increasingly polarized world, and much more.
This is Conflict, Power, and Persuasion, podcast of the Canadian International Institute of Applied Negotiation.
We'll just jump right in. I've been looking forward to this. It's been a long time coming. I think last time we had two guests on. It was Simon Mason and Olivia Lazardin for a conversation about climate change. Simon actually recommended having both of you on. So thank you, Simon, for that. And I'll let Katrina maybe explain the connection of, why you're appearing together. It's an interesting one, but we'll start with maybe Zaza, if we start with a brief introduction from yourself, and then we'll move to Katrina for an introduction, as well as explaining the linkage. And if you could keep it brief, I know that's going to be difficult. You have quite an interesting background, the medical doctor background, the lawyer, and then into mediation and arbitration. So in your own words, if you would, please enlighten us about yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Warren. So my name is Zaza Johnson Elsheikh. By the name, you can probably understand that there's a mixture there of ethnicities. So my maternal lineage are strict Baptists who were Jamaican. So there's the culture and religion there, and father's side Sudanese Muslim. So I've been brought up in a mixed household, both culture, religion, and language, English and Arabic. So a lot of my work and my interests have grown out of that. And I think what's been especially helpful for me, which also led to different career choices, is that it's been very difficult, if perhaps impossible, to categorize me, because I had to be a chameleon. I had to change from one culture, religion, language to another culture, religion, language. And then now with the careers that you mentioned a moment ago in medicine, in law, mediation. So yeah, moving around those. So yeah, mediation is what I've been doing for the past 18 years. I'm particularly attracted to highly emotive conflicts. I don't know what that says about me, but I love the drama of it all. And I also love soothing that and facilitating transformation that I know that people need in their lives. So I'm only there as a facilitator to move from a place of anguish and turmoil to a place of better mutual understanding, if not peace. That's it.
Wow, right on. And I'm sure we'll hear more as we go. But that's a great start. Thank you. Katrina, if you could do a brief introduction of yourself, and then perhaps you can explain the linkage between you and Zaza.
Sure. So maybe the linkage already comes a bit in my introduction. So yeah, my name is Katrina Abatis. My name is actually Greek and British. So also there you can see the kind of different cultural backgrounds that I hold. I very much associate, and I think that's why we click straight away. Me and Zaza, when we met, was a bit this kind of chameleon feeling of growing up in one place, but not feeling entirely one thing. So yeah, so my dad is Greek and my mum's from the UK, and I was brought up in the UK. But then I became very, very interested in culture, and I lived in Japan for a while, which was also a really interesting experience for me. And now I'm living in Switzerland. So there's all these kind of different interests that I have in culture. And I think the culture shock I experienced in Japan also shaped a lot the direction I later took in my work, which was going down this route of understanding kind of culture shock and the effects of that. And so now, being based in Switzerland, I came into this work a bit by accident, actually. I moved over for my partner's work, and found this job advert that was supposed to be helping on a religion and mediation course. So I came into this work a bit by accident, and I'm working at the Centre for Security Studies, which is a think tank based in a university in Zurich. So it's ETH Zürich, the university. And we're kind of trying to bridge a bit this role between policy in peace and mediation, between then the more academic side as well, and bringing all of these things. So bringing teaching in, bringing work on peace processes that the Swiss are specifically interested in from a practical perspective. And then there's a big teaching component. So it's kind of teaching, applied research, and then working on peace processes. And the link, so when I first met Zaza, you can correct me, Zaza, if I'm wrong, I think it was 2016 on a peace mediation course. It was in a really beautiful location in the mountains in Switzerland. So it was an amazing location. And as I said, we met at that course. I was doing the administration for that course at the time. And we just hit it off from there. And I thought, wow, I've met this amazing lady that I would really like to write about her incredible work in the UK. And that's kind of how it came to be, and how we then developed the relationship into this paper and different conversations since then.
Correct.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make sure the stage has been set here. You met Zaza, really impressed, and it led to this paper, which is called Culturally Oriented Mediation and Peace, Inviting the Elephant into the Room, Culturally Oriented Mediation and Peace Practice. Okay, that's what we're going to talk about. And the topic is cultural mediation, right? What is cultural mediation?
Yeah, so the way I've written about it in the paper, I was kind of a bit careful about the words I used. Was culturally oriented mediation. So I think again, I see that me and Zaza both have this interest in how culture and perception shifts different conflict parties' responses to conflict, and also the way that peace is then made. So I think, culture has always existed, mediation has always existed, but it's a kind of different way of approaching conflict, I would say, which often is not given enough attention, in my opinion. So in the paper, I kind of look from a more, because I didn't come from a political science or international relations background, but when I was reading a lot of the literature from that, when I started this work, I realized that a lot of it didn't specifically, or there are specific people who do talk about it, but it wasn't a kind of dominant part of the work. And now I also come to see culture, I think, linked to a way of looking at worldview or world viewing. So kind of seeing the world with different lenses that we bring to conflict. So I think the term culturally oriented mediation just seemed to fit with this particular paper, and seemed to fit very much with Zaza's approach and the way, Zaza can talk about this more, but about her own organization. So yeah, it's not new, but I think it's also an important way, now that the world is becoming so interlinked and globalized, and that we're misunderstanding each other, I would say, more than ever. I think it's an important lens for viewing the kind of peace work that we do, and also to analyze conflict from that perspective.
Right on. Okay. Now, I thought a way to approach this was to introduce some of the concepts from Katrina's model presented in that paper, and then to turn it over to you both to essentially illustrate the concepts through Zaza's experiences, and so sort of bring the real life case study, and then Katrina, you could tie it back to the model. So I'll just quickly see if I can pull it up here, go over a section from the paper, your paper. So you suggest there's 3 components of culturally oriented mediation. Number 1, identifying collective cultural dimensions. 2, adapting the mediator's role and attitude. 3, adapting the mediator's techniques. So digging into those just a bit further, for the identifying the collective cultural dimensions, they would be looking at value differences, social and religious identity, and frame of reference for justice. I like that one. Number 2, the mediator's role and attitude is a close relationship without an explicit mandate, active and fluid role, and non-judgmental. So 1 and 2 would stand out for me there as being rather unconventional. And then the mediator's techniques, exploring taboos, religious reality testing, exposing social hierarchies, probing worldviews, and explaining legal boundaries, confidentiality even more explicit. Now, I'm not sure we'll be able to dig into all of these, but I hope you can touch on many of them. So I'll turn it over to you both, and perhaps starting with Katrina, because Zaza's relevant experiences that helped you develop this. Maybe you could prompt Zaza for what story or experience you'd like her to describe. And then, so that we're not left guessing too much, maybe you can give us an idea of the principles that we just went through here from your model that are relevant to the experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And maybe just to add one more thing to it, I guess that's important is when I was looking at this kind of conflict resolution literature and thinking about Zaza's work, is this idea that there are still kind of techniques that are very much present in Zaza's work as well, which are, this kind of idea of issue-based mediation, so interest-based, getting to the interests behind the positions, which I'm sure you've talked about on this podcast before, but that idea, but then kind of that coming out of this, and there I was looking really specifically at a very interesting book by Sarah Cobb, and others who look at this kind of different introduction, these different epochs of conflict resolution. So where they're moving from this very interest-based that they say comes out of this kind of Cold War mentality of how there are specific issues to be resolved at the table, so tangible issues at stake, and then it's really the mediator's job to get behind those. And then moving through to this, what they called Epoch 2, which is based on the then Bosnian and Rwandan genocide, where they said actually, relationships become more important, and it's the mediator's job then to go through these different kind of relationship aspects and bring transformation in relationships between the conflict parties. And looking at Zaza's work and the kind of depth that she goes to in her interactions with conflict parties, I realized that those two were present. It wasn't to say they were neglected, but she also then brought this aspect, which I found to be more the cultural aspect, which was really seeing herself as part of the same conflict system and really bringing this very deep self-reflexivity into the work, analyzing her own kind of lens of seeing the conflict, but also going much deeper with the parties and exploring what these elements were and bringing out what I've called the elephants in the room. So bringing out these kind of aspects which a lot of mediators don't touch, don't go to. So it was really like bringing in these elements which are seen as taboo or maybe even seen as unconscious because they're there, but we don't think about them.
Okay, that's good context. The cultural elements that are taboo or even unconscious, that we don't think about them, and to be culturally oriented is to bring the elephants into the room, the subtitle of your paper. Okay, great. Is there a specific experience of Zaza's you'd like to start with to sort of get the ball rolling to demonstrate the ideas here?
So I was thinking, one of the stories, and I've written also a blog about this, was when I was thinking about bringing Zaza's inputs also to a bigger kind of international crowd in terms of peace mediation work. And there, I think what was really interesting for me was one of the cases that was unshame triggered violence. And I'll let Zaza explain why she prefers to use that term and what it means. But in that case, I think very clearly it came out the cultural angle, but also the kind of relationship and issue-based processes that were part of that peaceful resolution of that conflict. So in the paper, I have used obviously assumed names. So I used who I named Mariam for the paper's purposes, and her brother. So I don't know, Zaza, is it easier? Do you want to explain? I can explain the story, but I think it's also good if you do that.
Sure. And I think from the outset, I'd like to just also think about, so I'm thinking this through as I speak it, the difference between what we often consider in classical mediation model, which is being culturally sensitive. So comparing being culturally sensitive to culturally oriented mediation, what's the difference? Because I can imagine that somebody says, well, we're always culturally sensitive, And so this isn't about whether you shake hands or not, or whether you have a box of tissues ready for men to cry if they so wish, all those sorts of things that you might think about, that would be culturally insensitive to do that, This is more, as you were mentioning, Goran, about having the lenses on, so the specs on, to be culturally oriented. So going deeper than the niceties or the sort of do's and don'ts, the please don't make such a faux pas by, offering to shake hands with somebody who culturally would not be comfortable to do that. This is well beyond that. So putting those specs on, as I now remember the story and how it was. And so often when I'm telling this story, I say that, Mariam contacted me, so direct contact by phone, and asked me to help her because she needed to see her mother, her ailing mother, but she was very scared of being killed. So that as an opening sort of request is a bit, why? Why would you be so petrified of being killed? And so she told me that, in fact, she had married her sister's ex-husband. So this was an elder sister, elder by maybe 6 years or so. And she had now married her sister's ex-husband, and they had a child together. Now, here we are needing to, let's say, have this visit to her mother, and her being told very clearly by her older brother and other family members as well, that if she ever put her foot on the threshold of their home, that they would kill her for doing such a shameful thing as marrying her sister's ex-husband. Nobody does that, was what they said. Yeah. And so when I talk about this in other audiences, so this was a family who were of Pakistani origin, when I talk about this in other settings, it's something that people are able to relate to, because it is an unusual thing to marry your sibling's ex. Yeah. Is there any law against it? Absolutely not. Is there any religious impermissibility? No, there is not. It's not prohibited under any religious text that I know of, and certainly not Islam. And in fact, what happened, and many times at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was that people would marry the widows of, so a man would marry his brother's widow. Yeah. So keeping the children in the family, so to speak. So now coming to this case, why it's in the book, and why we discussed it and thought about it so deeply, was because this was not something what I was used to before in shame-triggered violence cases. The threat of shame-triggered violence was if a girl or a boy was seen to be engaging in a sexual relation that they're not supposed to under Islam, then I could kind of understand that. But this was something that had nothing to do with Islam or any other religion. It wasn't a deviation from the expectations or the permissibility there. So what happened was that I went to the family home. So Warren, this is a whole new level of cold calling, uninvited, gone to this house. The door is not opened. I see the curtains twitching. This is also an English phrase. You see the curtains twitching, that somebody is there. And then I was physically hauled in, after also being the subject of some quite hurtful comments, so slurs. They were about which country I come from, but that wasn't the time to address those slurs. I was there to do something else. And what we went through was a lot of anger expressed by Miriam's brother, a lot of anger. And unfortunately as well, sadly, I would say, a lot of vitriolic comment about her, wishing her, the worst death possible. And this was all an expression of, a violent expression, but an authentic expression of the extent of hurt that Miriam had caused this family, that she could no longer be seen as part of the family because a member of the family wouldn't inflict this kind of hurt.
Okay. Shame-triggered violence?
Yes. Why shame-triggered violence? Because it has nothing to do with honor. The objective is to restore honor, but the behavior has nothing to do, or the feeling has nothing to do with being an honorable feeling. So the vitriol with which the elder brother spoke about his younger sister, there was no honor in that, neither Islamically or culturally. Pakistan, UK, an elder brother wouldn't wish cancer and gangrene on his younger sister, wouldn't wish that. There was nothing about honor, but shame, yes, the wish and the need, the absolute visceral need to delete the existence of this shame triggering sense that was ongoing while she lived. She would continue to elicit this shame feeling, and such an intense feeling, because this wasn't something that was just temporary, a fleeting incident. She was married with a child to his sister's ex.
Okay, thank you. So just some technical details I'd like to sort of clarify, and I think this will come out as Katrina highlights the cultural components. I think I went through something. What was the line? It was without an explicit mandate, the mediator's role. So can you explain why you felt it was good to sort of just do that cold call, as you put it, and just that little detail, if you could unpack that a bit, please.
Sure, absolutely. So I am a faith leader, a Muslim faith leader within the UK. This was a Muslim mediation service. This lady, Miriam, approached, asked for my help, and I knew that a phone call wasn't going to do it. So the next best thing was to go round, appeal to reason, tell them that, I'm non-judgmental, I'm not on Miriam's side. Yes, she is the one who has, let's say, elicited the invitation to mediate, and I am now coming as the mediator. So usually it would be the parties who would agree the mediation, but I am now coming as the mediator to invite them to the mediation table, so to speak. Yeah. And in that process, rather than it just being a no thank you or a yes please, there needed to be some persuasion, some quite sort of hardcore, I would call it, persuasion. Right. In that, as I said about the slurs, so withstanding and overcoming, a verbal assault. That's what it was. And there was, to some extent, a physical assault, because I didn't ask to be touched. But I can't say that it was unwanted conduct, because I was glad to be hauled into the house. I was pleased this was fair.
Okay. And keeping your neutrality and impartiality in that aspect, coming, representing one side, it's difficult. Katrina, please, if you could then highlight, maybe I jumped the gun by bringing up one of the bullets there, the explicit mandate, but if you could maybe highlight some of the elements that you found were contributing to your thinking around this paper.
Yeah, I found also when I was talking to Zaza about this case, I found it really fascinating, because obviously when we learn about classical mediation, it's very much you need to already have a mandate from both the parties and you don't get engaged. What I really noticed about Zaza's work is this, what I called active impartiality. So the fact that she really chooses to go and kind of create these opportunities for peace, rather than sitting back and waiting for, them to come, waiting for the phone to ring. And I think the turning up on the doorstep kind of approach, it's very risky in a lot of ways, right? It's really not going, you don't have a nice cozy mediation office. You're not bringing two people to it. You're not in your own environment, in your own space, where you would normally have this kind of, if you're thinking of very Western or mostly like a British kind of mediation setting, it would be in an office. So I think this kind of very active approach, it doesn't come without risks, but what I really noticed from Zaza's work is the fact that then you have to have this much longer trust building phase, and it is very possible. And actually what she was even doing is playing a bit on this cultural aspect of being on the doorstep. She's visible to the rest of the neighbors. The curtains are twitching because also they don't want her to be there. The hauling into the house is also because she's kind of creating this way of having a point of entry into the mediation. And I think more importantly even than that is that she's speaking for a party who is actually a lot less powerful. So she's playing with this power relation. The lady could not have come to that house herself. She would have been subjected to that violence that was being threatened. So there was no way. So she's the stand-in, if you like. But at the same time, she's not acting purely in that party's interest. She's listening to this, overwhelming kind of wave of vitriol. They're attacking her because she's there. She's in the place of that person who doesn't have the power to assume that role. And I think that's why I'm saying, when you mentioned the kind of non-judgmental, in culturally oriented mediation, the non-judgment should be there in all mediation processes, but it has to be so much deeper in these situations, because the emotion is so heavy when you have a situation where actually you haven't been explicitly mandated by one party to be there. So you are going to be confronted with a lot more surprise, a lot more, possibly rage. And I think the other thing that really interested me in this case also was a bit this bringing in the gender perspective. So it's actually, as a woman, appearing more non-threatening on the doorstep, to be actually taken in. So using that even in a way to Zaza's advantage, to be able to, expect that there's a bigger taboo there against violence towards women in a Pakistani society, in a British society. So there's a bit this taboo. And I think in this case also Zaza saying, I have nothing to gain from this situation. I'm coming to make peace. Also as an Islamic, being connected to the Islamic tradition and saying, I come in peace for this work. I'm not being paid for this. It's really important statement to make about the kind of non-judgmental and very, I would say, active impartiality in this situation. So it draws on many ways of understanding culture, both, can you then have somebody in your neighborhood whilst the neighbors are watching, being on the doorstep, and also like putting yourself at personal risk to do this, but then not expecting, not doing it for personal gain, but really because you want to bring about a peaceful resolution. I think it shows a very high level of wanting to change the situation, of really being there for the conflict parties.
Mm-hmm. Active impartiality. So that the lack of a mandate, the cold call requiring, in this case, an increased ability to be non-judgmental, to withstand the personal attacks as being a stand-in for the lowered party, as you put it. But the more, more trust building required as well. Okay, great. So we have one under our belt. Can we move on to another?
Mm-hmm. So we can. Maybe this I found quite interesting. It wasn't, and a lot of these cases, specifically, I've been talking about peace practice because not all of them were mediations, or not all of them led to a mediation. But I think another case that was more communal case in the UK was a bit there's an organization in the UK called Britain First. So Zaza also, again, without an explicit mandate, you could say, came across a group when she'd been praying in the mosque, and came outside and noticed a big commotion outside of that mosque. Just to explain maybe for the audience then who maybe don't know who Britain First are. So in the UK, they are a group who, I'm just going to read out because there's a statement from their website that says they're opposed to the increasing colonization of our homeland through uncontrolled mass immigration. So they position themselves in a way of trying to reclaim the UK for what they class as British, and I'm putting that in inverted commas here. So they're a group which, propose a very right-wing kind of ideology, and they wanted to stream an event to their Facebook pages, and it was after the Parsons Green. So there was a bomb attack on a London tube at Parsons Green, and this happened directly afterwards. So the Britain First came to the mosque and started accusing the men who were leaving the mosque of, why is it always Muslims who are causing violence? And Zaza was there at the time and chose to run into this fray and position herself very carefully between the two groups of opposing Britain First members and the Muslims who were coming out of the mosque.
Okay. Thank you for setting the stage. Zaza, please.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I mean, again, in terms of trust building, I had the trust already of the Muslim brothers, we'll call them the Muslim worshippers. I'm very active in my mosque and lead the women in my mosque. I'm known by the men. So in that situation, seeing all the things that we know, the classical signs, the clenched fist, the puffed out chest of both parties. So we had Britain First, there were 4 of them just sort of in front of their cars. The two cars and 4 men in front of their cars, and then there were 150 worshippers, Muslim worshippers, behind me. And I literally decided to be that human shield, to act as a human shield for Britain First, because I knew they were live streaming. They wanted to provoke a reaction. I knew that the Muslim brothers would play into that, exactly their agenda, by throwing a punch. Then we'd have scuffles, we'd have blood, we'd have all sorts of things, which would immediately just be the evidence that Britain First followers would want and need, and that would be present forever on the internet. So yes, I chose to be the human shield, knowing very well that definitely the Muslim brothers would not try to hurt me, and they would be wanting to protect me. So therefore, they wouldn't hurt the Britain First men, 2 of whom had already gone back to their cars as they saw the men coming out. So again, that was for me very telling of the need to fulfill a particular agenda. So they were ready to drive off if something happened. But they also needed something to happen. So it was being live streamed. And there were some complaints in the live streaming saying, who is the smiley hijabi who's standing in the way of this drama happening? So again, I chose to take that as a compliment, since I am very smiley and I do wear the hijab. But of course, it wasn't intended to be a compliment. And in that time, I was, as close, physically close to the lead of Britain First. At that time, the lead, I don't know if it's okay to say his name, so I'll leave the name out, but the lead of Britain First, as close to him, physically as close as would be permissible for me as a woman, a Muslim woman who is quite orthodox. So not quite touching him, but almost there. And he did ask me, why are you doing this? Why are you standing here? And I said, because I want to provide an opportunity for you to listen better to, the responses that you're getting. The responses from the Muslim brothers was, it's not us. Why are you coming here and saying that it's us? So in order for the leader to be able to listen to how his statements were making people feel, these allegations that it's always you lot, always Muslims, he went as far as to say, I don't know why it's never the Sikhs, it's never the Hindus, it's always you Muslims. Yeah. So, that again was a situation where I wasn't invited by either party. In the previous case, I was invited by one party. In actual fact, the Muslim brothers were asking me to move out of the way so that they could inflict harm on the leaders of Britain First. And I refused to do that because I knew if I moved, what would happen.
What happened?
The police came. The police came 20 minutes later. That's how long it took. 20 minutes later, the police came and, actively encouraged the dispersal of both parties.
Good for you. Okay, so is this another, returning to your list, Katrina, is this another example of without an explicit mandate, the mediator's role and attitude, or was there other elements of this that stood out to you?
I
I
think the
would
other
add,
elements. Sorry, go ahead, Zaza.
sorry, I was just going to add that in both cases, I think that it's incredibly disarming when a woman, and you touched on this, Katrina, a woman puts herself in harm's way, potential harm's way. It's almost, it would be rude to either not let her in, it would just be so shameful to not let her in the first case. And secondly, it would be, unconscionable to cause physical harm to a woman who is trying to promote peace.
Mm.
And for both of those situations, even though the leader of Britain First is not, from an ethnic culture, that point of not hurting a woman who is trying to promote peace transcends all cultures, more so than a man being in that position.
Yeah, and I think the other thing from both the cases, actually, in the first case, being hauled into the house and being kind of questioned on her Muslim credentials, and in this case also being labeled as smiling hijabi and not taking it personally. I think again it goes to this really kind of deep level of being able to be non-judgmental in a very, in a way that it's very much attacking a certain identity that Zaza holds, or it could be seen as that. So I think that the idea of not then reacting, because you are going into a situation where you are not mandated in the same way as you would in a classical mediation, is really important to be able to kind of hold that position and hold that space and not kind of be drawn in too personally or too emotionally, because then I think things can fall down. So Zaza has the very strong conviction not to kind of sit in the office waiting for phone calls. And I think both these cases show also this kind of very active approach to mediation, which is not usual in when we look at more kind of classical mediation cases. So whether it's going to somebody's house, which is not an office, or whether it's being in the community at the time and running to that conflict, I think it really shows this more active approach to finding entry points into mediation. And I think that's also very important for peace mediation when we think about it more internationally as well. Is that how can we be more creative in finding entry points for mediation? Why do we always need to wait for a mandate, or can we also think about how we can create situations to kind of encourage peace, or to bring in the right kind of mediation team to be able to address deeper issues? And I think in this case as well, this idea of, this kind of questioning, which I think we have in a lot of societies, what does it mean to be British? The whole moniker of Britain First, what does that actually mean? Like, they are really thinking about, and I think there's a cultural identity crisis in many countries of like, what does that mean? What does my nationality mean? And how can I kind of distinguish myself from other groups? And I think that putting yourself in that situation and dealing with those issues that are much broader socially is a very tricky situation to be in if you are not the kind of culturally adept person that Zaza is.
Okay, I want to keep moving because I'm enjoying the stories, and I hope to squeeze in another one. Through the list, we got the identifying collective cultural dimensions, the value differences, social religious identity, frame of reference for justice. If we don't expose that, I think we would, if we could revisit that one, I'd like to hear more about that one. The mediator's role and attitude, the close relationship without an explicit mandate. We're sort of covering the active and fluid role, the non-judgmental aspect, definitely covered. Mediator's techniques, exploring taboos, religious reality testing, exposing social hierarchies, perhaps some gender aspects there that we've talked about, probing worldviews, and explaining legal boundaries, confidentiality, even more explicit. So we are making progress here with knocking some of these off the list here. Can we do another one?
Yeah, and maybe just before that, because I think it's something we didn't talk about, one of the cases we already discussed, which I think has a really interesting example of the religious reality testing. That actually does come up in the case with Mariam. So there was a kind of, in mediation, normally we look at reality testing. Normally when we're looking at agreements to see whether they hold, the mediator can use it in several kind of different points of the mediation process. But often, it's looked at as, will this actually, if we have an agreement, will this actually hold up in real life? And the mediator has to use some kind of practical questioning techniques to really get to the bottom of it. Will this hold if we have this agreement? Is it going to be sustainable? So I found, again, talking to Zaza about this case, very, very interesting, because she's actually bringing in, with her scriptural knowledge and being an Islamic scholar and teacher, this as a way of reality testing. So I don't know, Zaza, if you want to mention and what it was specifically in the case of Mariam, where you kind of were using this.
Cool. So in the case of Mariam, I think what's really important, and I guess it's relevant to being non-judgmental as well, is when the elder brother was saying, it's my Islamic duty to kill her. He was asserting this emphatically, putting his hand to his chest, saying basically, I'm serious about this. I'm committed to executing my Islamic duty to kill her. So what I could have done, just to make the point, what I could have done was to say, oh, no, it isn't. But what I did was, okay, you've said this a couple of times. So do you want to please explain to me where you're getting this idea from? What's your source? What's your reference? In a very gentle way, so that it was more as if I was the student and he was the teacher, asking him, please help me, because I haven't come across this reference before, so perhaps you can help me. And very quickly, within seconds, him not being able to do that, even though he'd asserted probably half a dozen times that, oh yes, it is in the Quran, it is in the Hadith, which is the narrations of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. But I guess what here is not just being non-judgmental, but also being gracious, to not, insinuate in any shape or form. Told you, there's nothing there, But okay, so I see that, actually this might be more of a cultural belief, offering that as a face-saving exercise, as an option, I should say. To say, okay, maybe this is more of a cultural expectation then rather than a religious. And of course, they're sometimes inextricably linked. But one, particularly the religious aspect, doesn't actually have a foundation in religion. It's more that it is a cultural belief, strong cultural belief, which is then, let's say, conflated with religion. And so, I allowed him to realize that and to almost come to that conclusion himself, to be like, it seems, now that I've checked, now that I've thought about it, it seems it's a cultural reference rather than an Islamic reference. And that doesn't immediately get him off the hook. Because then he may resort to, well, then it's my cultural belief, my cultural duty to kill her. Yeah. So that's where, the trust needs to be there already, to have been built already. Otherwise, he would simply just duck into a different avenue, one which I've actually helped him to reach by saying, perhaps it's a cultural, it's got a cultural root. And so therefore, what's very important is to allow that face-saving option of culture, but then to draw very swiftly, but again, very gently, to how sinful it would be, Islamically sinful it would be, to touch a hair on his sister's head. Yeah.
Yeah.
So remaining within the religious framework to be able to, you know, move very swiftly and be agile to, you know, how sinful it would be, because that is the primer before going to the logistics of, you know, you will go to prison, you know this, you know, so there was the reality testing around that as well. So not just the cultural versus religious reality testing, which was done with giving an opportunity for the person to come up with their proof. So in reality testing, we might do a situational reality testing. This is more of a scriptural reality testing, but you know, going via the cultural face-saving option to come back to how sinful it would be if he did do what he was thinking of doing.
It's a great example. The shifting between the cultural aspects and tying it back to the religion, and then even the little tips in there about how to subtly, instead of saying, well, you're wrong, you're not reality testing in that way, but to, you know, turn it on them to help me understand, you know, where you're getting this from. That's a great example. Do we have time for another one? Okay, I'll turn it over to Katrina then.
So maybe then thinking about this this frame of reference for justice, I think it's very important, because I think this underpins a lot of worldview conflicts that happen in the UK also, when you have kind of communities who maybe didn't grow up in the UK, moved to the UK later. So obviously mediation has to operate within a legal framework, and in the UK's case, obviously within the British legal framework. And so one of the cases, again, that I was really struck by listening to Zaza's long experience was a case where, and again, it's the question of like, do you even get involved in the mediation at all? So it was a really interesting case for me of female genital mutilation. So obviously in terms of UK law, that's not legal. And in terms of kind of cultural traditions, people are coming over in places where even where it's not maybe considered legal, but customarily this is kind of a tradition that defines femininity for some in some different cultures. So I think the idea that Zaza was then a mediator for this and also had a kind of personal link to this case was really interesting. And this was the case of a husband and wife who had very opposing ideas to their own daughter and what should happen in this case. So maybe I'll let Zaza explain further, but I think it brings in some really interesting example of how you need to work within a very strict boundary in terms of legal boundary of the UK, but also how you can address some of the issues without, you know, being able to have the issues open for discussion in the first place is a very interesting one for me.
Mm-hmm. So in this case, there was even the possibility that because of FGM being illegal in the UK, the mediation wouldn't even have taken place, because the husband, who was the first party contacting me, initially didn't want to give his name. He just said, you know, my wife, my daughter, this is what my wife is, you know, really, really keen on doing, committed to doing. And I'm against it, and I need your help, but I need also for you not to call the police when I put the phone down. Yeah, so there was a lot of fear initially. Yeah. So this person called me on a no caller ID, you know, to make sure that I couldn't even trace the call back. So I said, look, what I can do is that I can discuss it, but of course, if we don't reach agreement to not do it, then of course I would be duty bound to report it to the police. Absolutely, for so many reasons, you know, beyond it being illegal, you know, that I was formerly an obstetrician gynecologist. I know how devastating, physically devastating FGM is, the number of complications that arise from the procedure. And so we had the mediation. The wife initially remained adamant, but was open to persuasion. and then lastly agreed that she would not go through the procedure for her daughter, that she would not perform it. And within the realms of the mediation, she did disclose that she would be going back to her country of origin for the holidays, the summer holidays. And again, the husband was, diffident about that and nervous that something could happen if she went abroad. And she absolutely promised that she would not do anything to harm their daughter. For her, the word harm was quite a difficult one for her to say, because actually a lot of the time in the mediation, she was saying to me, because my country of origin and where I was brought up shares that belief. So even though it's illegal in Sudan, actually illegal, still culturally it's very strongly practiced. And I can't think of one woman within my extended family who has not been circumcised, who has not undergone FGM. So it is so commonplace, even though it's illegal in terms of statute. And so what happened there is that this woman, she said that what she needed to do and wanted to do, and the lines that she came out with, familiar lines, was, "You're a mother too. You understand that you want the best for your children, yeah. And this is the best for my daughter. This is a tamper-proof seal, which will ensure that she has the best possible chance of marrying whoever she pleases one day, because the proof will be there through the tamper-proof seal." So, I won't say any more about how she was saying that, just like a drink, nobody buys a drink if the tamper-proof seal has been broken, because that's a little irritating, but I've said it anyway, because I still remember how it didn't sit well with me. So yes, she was very, really promoting her maternal feelings for her daughter, wanting the best for her daughter. And she signed the settlement agreement. The terms were agreed with her that this would not take place at all. And in fact, her plans even to go to her country of origin, which was also her husband's, that she would not be going, she would leave that plan. And all was well, except my gut. As a mediator, you have this feeling, this knot in your intestines when things just don't add up or don't seem like they should. And so I got, I understood some days later that she, before that, I because of this knot, I actually did inform the police, even though the settlement agreement had been signed. I informed the police, and they put a border stop on this particular family. I had the details by now. They'd signed the settlement agreement, and I was informed a few days later that that stop was exercised. I think it was 5 days later. I can't remember exactly how long, but a few days later, that the mother did try to leave without her husband's knowledge to the country of origin. So, yeah, again, being a meddling mediator with a gut that troubles you when these things happen, because I knew that I could be breaching confidentiality unnecessarily when I made the call to the police. And that was the first thing that this woman said to me, the mother said to me after she had been stopped and was able to make a phone call. She said that I had breached my duties as a Muslim and as a mediator, because, she had signed the settlement agreement. Yes, she was going to go to her country of origin, to her family, where often these FGM would be performed, but I had no right to cause all this trouble by, making it seem like she had a plan, because she didn't have a plan. Well, for me, only God knows whether she didn't have a plan or not. But the point for me was, why would you not tell your husband that you're going to this country when you have specifically said that you would leave that plan?
It's a tough situation. You had the signed agreement, and then having that feeling, that gut instinct that something was off, and going and reporting it. That's a tricky situation. Was that a hard decision?
It was hard in that, these people, they've sat in my office, we've had this mediation, it's really difficult, lots of very personal, deeply personal stuff has come out. So it's hard to say to people, you can trust me, and to set the parameters for that trust. Because I said right from the outset that if, I told the husband this, not the wife, but I told the husband this in the initial call, that if we don't reach an agreement to not proceed with this, I will inform the police. And then even though we did reach the agreement, I've gone back on my word. But it's but at the end of the day, Warren, I would say that I am the most important person in the mediation room in terms of my conscience. And I knew that I would not be able to live with myself if a little girl went through something that would have her life, would, for the rest of her life, would cause her an adverse impact. I could not do that.
Katrina, your takeaways from this?
Yeah, I think one point I'd like to add, Zaza's really kind of outlined this, and I think it plays into this kind of question again about frameworks for justice, and exactly why it's so important in kind of culturally oriented mediation to make sure that the confidentiality agreement is really explicit at the beginning. So kind of, because you're dealing with such emotive and difficult topics. But I think with this one as well, again, what struck me was the power relations. So in the person who wasn't in the room, right, was this little girl. So that girl not having a voice. And I think Zaza also explained to me that in this case, she actually decided to reveal her own story, linked to her own kind of cultural upbringing about this, and her own kind of questions then about, as a doctor, about how FGM then really affects the female body, what kind of complications come with it that are seen, in one kind of presentation of it as just a little cut, actually not being that at all, but having very kind of lifelong devastating impact on a girl's health and a woman's health. So I think bringing this voice of the child who was not in the room, exposing, again, bringing in, explicitly addressing this power relationship of this person who is not present, who does not have this voice, is really important. And I think, again, often doesn't happen in most kind of classical mediation. I think mediators in the international sphere, often there's this question of, who speaks first, how to have balance. Do you go ahead with mediation when the power imbalance is very, very strong? But it sort of keeps to questions like this. It doesn't go deeper into really like taking an active role in looking after these power relationships when that person is not present. So for me, this was a really kind of important story, and also very very difficult, again, to bring in this very personal experience of your own cultural upbringing and how that then has a relation on what you're seeing through your own kind of worldviews when you're speaking to these parents with very different opinions. And just the fact also of bringing in, so it was interesting to me to say, for the mother, actually, that was a big part of identity. So you might kind of question, like, why is it that a woman is wishing that on her daughter? But obviously the construction of femininity through culture is so strong that it was actually her being the proponent. So bringing in this idea of that you can actually discuss these very taboo issues of the fact that, what is this gender construction? How does culture then play into that? That it's not kind of to be taken for granted that that's just what every woman needs to do, needs to go through, I think is an important one. And these issues that are often seen, in UK culture, definitely you wouldn't touch them as a mediator. But I think there it is important to be able to bring these difficult conversations a bit more into the open, not saying that there's no punishment for acts like this, because obviously under the UK law there is, but also being able to bring them out in a way that possibly you can raise some understanding about these issues in different formats is important. So yeah, this was a case that very much struck me when I was sort of learning from Zaza's experience.
Okay. Thank you. Is there one more story that either of you would like to throw into the mix?
What may be interesting is the relevance of what we've just been talking about in terms of geopolitical issues. So I had a commercial case on the 14th of February. So everybody was celebrating Valentine's and I was mediating, where two Iraqi men had a shareholder dispute. The shares were in a business, and one of the Iraqi men was Jewish by background and the other was Muslim by background. And they had been lifelong friends. Their parents knew each other. They had grown up together in Iraq. Iraq isn't the country. I've changed everything, but they had grown up in that country. And then now, with the 7th of October having happened, and unfortunately the boycotts that people, certainly Muslims, were very committed to observing boycotts against Israeli shareholder businesses and other people as well, not just Muslims, but definitely Muslim communities. There was an expectation to observe boycotts. And that's something that within my faith leadership, I've been speaking a lot against boycotts, because I think that, it's very difficult for Jewish business owners to interpret them as anything other than anti-Semitic. And so I'm very, very committed to changing that. So in terms of this mediation, what was very important and very much closely linked to what we've been speaking about is I was appointed as a mediator at the suggestion of a rabbi. So in this case, uncharacteristically, Warren, I did have a formal mandate.
Right.
So I was recommended because of the organization that I lead, which is Belief in Mediation and Arbitration, and its acronym is BIMA, which for those who are familiar with what that means, it's where the Torah is read from. I am very, very interested in the origins of scripture, and so I chose this particular acronym to be a silent handshake gesture to my Jewish cousins as well, without the Muslims even realizing it.
Nice.
But so I was recommended. So clearly I'm Muslim. And so there could have been a question of bias towards the Muslim party. There could have also been a question of, as me being a faith leader, that, and perhaps known for speaking out against boycotts, that, this could be a bias that the party who was originally Jewish or is Jewish, who now lived in Israel as well, that it could be perceived as being a bit too biased against. Yeah. And so what happened there is that these two lifelong friends, business partners, were absolutely no issues between them, no conflict, family holidays together, etc., etc. And then this happened, the 7th of October happened. Still, there were no issues, because what did the 7th of October have to do with their relationship and their identities? Absolutely nothing. But by the latter part of November, the Muslim Party, because of the position of the business in London and the fact that he was so fearful that the boycotts would close down their business, they both owned it, 51% Jewish and 49% to the Muslim partner. So really fearful that it would close down the business, that the Muslim partner shrouded the frontage of the business with a Palestinian flag to sort of ward off any perception that this was anything but a pro-Palestinian business, notwithstanding the shareholding that people could look up on Companies House. And so when he did that, he didn't seek permission from his partner. He just thought this is a good thing to do and expected, so this is one of those situations where mismatch of expectations, expected his business partner to understand and be okay with that. Because the reason I mentioned that they're Iraqi was to drive home the point that neither of them are Palestinian, and also to advance or highlight the idea that just because you're Muslim doesn't mean that you are pro-Palestinian automatically, and furthermore, and more importantly, that you're anti-Israeli. It just doesn't compute. And so in this particular scenario, what happened and which triggered the conflict was this: how very dare you, by the Jewish background party, this is absolutely outrageous. How could you be siding with Palestinian against Israel? Israel is now my home. Jews are not safe. This is the only place that they're safe, in Israel. This is our homeland. And now you are, for want of a better phrase, pinning your colors to the mast, saying that you are pro-Palestinian. And so he said that he wanted to preserve their relationship. And so he asked if the Muslim party would buy his shares out, because their relationship was so important to both of them. Yeah. So notwithstanding the affront of doing what he did, the Jewish party really wanted to preserve the relationship and wrote to him saying, look, would you be willing to buy my shares? The conflict then escalated because the Muslim party said, again, how very dare you, here we are in a situation where the shares are worthless because the boycott was having more and more of an impact every day, to the point that it actually closed after the email was sent offering sale. It was closed because there was just no footfall. And, he said that, how could you be so selfish? And in that, in the mediation, he also said that Zionists are to blame for all of this. And the Jewish party said Muslims are to blame for all of this. So those two very provocative statements were exchanged in the mediation with me there. Which I thought was the best time for them to have been expressed. Otherwise, we perhaps wouldn't be in the mediation at all. And again, so what we've been talking about is being able to rise above Muslims are to be blamed for this, and to be able to bring some perspective to Zionists are to be blamed for this, for the loss of the business, when, many people closely align with Zionism at this time, and it means different things to different people as well. And so to be able to, and I think what was very different, although we talked about a case with siblings, in that case, although they were biologically related and, one would have thought that the relationship would be important. Here, there was no biological relationship, but there was that love that had been built up over years. And the relationship was of paramount importance, more so than the business. So that for me was beautiful to see that, to witness that, to be part of that. And of course, I guess it doesn't need saying, but I used that, the prime importance of the relationship, to be able to make that the destination that both parties wanted to reach, to preserve the relationship, whilst navigating all the geopolitical and the, difficult, sensitive statements that had been uttered in anger.
Okay, so some clear cultural components there. Although we haven't gotten into the nitty gritty of Zaza's approach, any comments on that so far, Katrina?
Yeah, and I think it's something I talk about in the paper. So one is a bit the choice of Zaza as a mediator there is very interesting because, again, I think with her chameleon spirit, she can really bridge these kind of different identities, which is really important. So I think, one is kind of thinking about the choice of a mediator where there is cultural or religious aspect to the conflict, which is key. And I think being able to then have the self-reflexivity, again, to not respond to those statements, to really go deeper and to kind of understand, the what's behind it all. So moving them onto the relationship aspect as the destination, as you said. But I think what struck me, again, just hearing that story now, was this kind of mismatch of expectations. So I think for me, this is often what is overlooked in mediation, is where there are these kind of cultural barriers where we assume something about the other person, maybe from our own, if we're from the same country, maybe we assume we have the same kind of values. And a lot of mediators won't then touch these unconscious issues in mediation. And so for me, Zaza is somebody who is brave enough to kind of reach those really critical points, kind of questioning what's behind them and bringing out then into a more kind of a deeper relationship-based approach, rather than just kind of skimming the surface of like, what are the issues? Are you going to apologize for this? Or, the more tangible issues that are in business negotiations, the kind of gold. This is really going deeper to the relationship aspect, but also maybe what's unspoken normally, this kind of deeper kind of cultural expectations that both sides have.
Okay, I'd like to switch gears and see if I can get a clear understanding of what it actually takes to apply a culturally oriented approach. Other than some of the things discussed, like being proactive to engage and create openings, how can we apply it? So, like, to resolve disputes with a strong cultural component, is it necessary to sort of need to have a deep understanding of the religion of the culture, or even to be a practitioner of that faith? Like, I may know a lot about, say, Hinduism, but I'm not a Hindu, and I'll never really know what it's like to be a Hindu. Am I at a disadvantage there, and I shouldn't engage? Like, I can't build the trust. I won't be able to see the connections. I guess I'm wondering whether this is more of a speciality, like requiring some level of deep understanding of the cultures you're engaged with, or can every mediator become a culturally oriented practitioner? So what exactly does it look like in mediation practice to be culturally oriented?
For me, I think it's really, and again, sort of learning, through Zaza's experience, but also in terms of my work, looking at more international mediation. It's really like I think we're still focused very much when we look at international mediation on this idea that the mediator has to be everything. And I think what's really important is we don't really build, we're very guilty, especially kind of, the Western world, of building this image of the mediators, this kind of superstar, normally male, white, working alone as a Superman figure. And I think what we really miss is the importance of a diversity and a mediation team. So I think that often when you're not mediating alone, you can bring in different competencies and different backgrounds and different ideas, which can really help to create this a better image of being impartial, because you have many different aspects of what impartiality means. And I think it comes in community mediation as well. And I think that Zaza obviously herself is a kind of self-proclaimed chameleon, so it's very helpful to bring in these different backgrounds. But I think often it's also the deeper level of reflection in understanding the dynamics and being prepared to go there with what you're seeing. And I know with BIMA itself, it's made up of different religious backgrounds, so it's not just from one faith tradition. So I see skills in bringing from different people, different aspects. I think also in terms of gender, where there are issues that speak specifically, to kind of more male, masculine ideas, or more feminine ideas, such as the case we discussed with the female genital mutilation. It's also important to be able to kind of provide different angles to this. And I think most of all, it's really important for the mediator to be trusted. So that comes in, in all mediation, but I would say it's even more important in culturally oriented mediation, is to be somebody who really can see a bit deeper than the surface issues, and to interrogate their own identities and work through their own issues, and come to the mediation already, having worked on themselves in some way, having the understanding that to be able to go deeper in their practice, they need to understand themselves as a human being first. So I think that often is missing in these more surface level mediations. And for me, Zaza is somebody who, yes, does bring in all these different aspects of identity, which can be used in a mediation process. But I think there's also other ways of dealing with that. And I think as a society, we're also becoming, it's very rare to find somebody who's based in like one cultural tradition or one kind of aspect. That we have many different aspects, all of us, to our identities.
Thank you. That's helpful. Zaza, can you add to that?
Yeah, sure. So I think, like we said earlier, it's the difference between culturally sensitive and culturally oriented mediation. So you do need particular specs for it, but you don't need to be from that particular culture. It's just, how you're looking at it, what you see. Okay. And if you're unfamiliar with what you see, to be able to ask questions, as we're trained to do as mediators, to ask those open questions, tell me how you see it, explain why that's important to you. Even when I share the, lots of my intersectionality with the parties, I make sure that I'm very careful not to say, oh, because you're a Muslim woman of African Caribbean heritage, that you must think this, that I always ask, because I think I'm more used to that because of this, not being categorized as something fixed. So, I think earlier, Warren, you said to me, the thing, you may have to be from the same faith tradition. So, for instance, you mentioned that when asking the question, I have mediated plenty of Christian on Christian conflicts, where one of them I've always found amusing, where the chaplain said, Zaza, I need you to mediate this because I'm past praying about it. Well past that. So I need somebody. And the reason I was chosen was because I'm not Christian, but I am a faith leader. So I would perhaps understand some of the common issues and challenges as a faith leader. So in terms of having those specs, coming back to that, those glasses, those spectacles that allow you to look deeper. It's there is the vision part of it, the visual part of it, but there's also the auditory sense as well. What the silence means, the non-verbal, when the person looks or changes their position, or falls silent when ordinarily they're quite speak quite a lot, or the various non-verbal cues, which then is an opportunity for the mediator to also be less verbose and to just say, I noticed that struck a chord with you. Tell me about that. Yeah.
So being tuned in to recognize something's under the surface, then asking the right questions to dig under the surface. But at some point, won't I need a deep understanding of the culture to ask the right questions to recognize the nuances, to nest the issues within the cultural context?
So for me, what I'm saying is that you can do this with no prior knowledge, but it's going to be, a mediator who has very strong skills, those skills being noticing the nonverbal cues, asking the questions in an open enough way that there's no sort of leading nature to it or loaded with assumptions. So you'll have to be a highly skilled mediator. It is possible to do it. But I think for many mediators, it would perhaps need that prior knowledge. And again, being really cautious about what do you mean by the prior knowledge? Because if you read a book about Islam and then go into a mediation which happens to have a Muslim party in it, their interpretation of Islam could be very different from what you've read, as you said, with Hinduism or Buddhism or anything else. I would definitely encourage caution around thinking, because you've read about FGM, now I know what it is all about, all the multiple dimensions of it and what it means. So, for instance, I doubt in a book on FGM that you would find somebody who's writing the book saying, I was appalled that my mother would not allow me to have that procedure.
Right.
It's either the author is going to be somebody who has been subjected to FGM, or is an objective observer who says that is so dangerous, don't do it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for me, when Katrina was saying earlier about my personal experience, I went through that experience of being so outraged at 6 years old that I was the only girl in my class who wasn't going to go through that procedure because my mother wouldn't allow it. My mother, being Jamaican, strict Baptist, would not allow it. Everybody else, from the eyes of a 6-year-old, this was so unfair, that I wasn't going to have this rite of passage that everybody else was going to have. And I wouldn't have the party that everybody was. I can, still feel that anger, that I wasn't going, I lost out. It was an injustice to not allow me to have that procedure, So, why I'm bringing that up now is the caution that we need to exercise in reading a book about something and then going in as a mediator thinking that, I understand about this now, and then perhaps not looking for those extra signs, the cues, etc., etc. In terms of training, we have run a course. This is the Faithful Dispute Resolution course. We have run that. With all these sorts of an exposure to these types of cases. There are a number of cases. So as Katrina said, people will have the opportunity to work through all of that themselves. So, all of these sort of conflicts these dilemmas within oneself. And just before we started recording, I spoke to you about my humanitarian work and encountering women who have been victims of rape in a war zone. And the cognitive dissonance between them being so resilient because they have children and having to push forward. There's no time to be wallowing in despair and so on. They have made that choice to push forward, to learn skills. That's how I encounter them, learning practical skills that will be income generating for them. And so that dissonance between, cheering them on, commending them, affirming all their courage, and what for me is still a real internal issue, which is the rage, the outcry of the injustice that is being ignored, actively ignored, I would say, universally at the moment. And so, that kind of thing working, that's the type of thing, not this particular situation, because that's current, but we have run the course so that people could sit with and work through the FGM scenarios of radicalization, when somebody is talking about beheading non-believers, these are all real cases, and that non-believers in Islam should go to hellfire, etc., etc. And in one of those courses, we had a scenario where one Muslim participant and one Christian participant had got on really well. They were really engaging with each other, really listening to one another, and it had all the hallmarks of being a wonderful, ongoing relationship past the course. And then in his excitement, the Muslim participant chose to share a video. He said, I just want to show you a video about Islam. And he asked if he could use the projector. And so fortunately, it was just the three of us in the room. The Christian participant, myself, and this Muslim participant. And, the Christian participant was saying how eager she was to learn about Islam. So he said, hey, I've got this video, I'll show it to you. And towards the end, I could tell right from the beginning, this doesn't look like, what I would like Islam to be projected as. It was a 2-minute video. And at the end of it, there was a burning cross, a burning crucifix. And the Muslim participant could not see anything wrong with this. So he was like, it's great, isn't it? Whilst this burning cross is there. No. And so, here you have two people, one who said, I'm really excited to learn more about Christianity. The other saying, I'm really excited to learn more about Islam. They're on a course together that explores bridging extreme differences. And yet you could have such a situation. So fast forwarding, there was a lot of anger from the participant who's Christian. That was again a mediation of me saying, would you like to say how you're feeling? And, I see that to the Muslim participant, I see that you had the best of intentions, but can you see how the impact on this participant and why this would be so distressing for her, like you would find perhaps distressing a burning Quran? At the end of a Christian video, for instance, not that I've seen one, but I imagine there could be one. Can you see how the impact of that? So I guess what I'm saying to you, Warren, is that, there needs to be caution exercised by in preparation for coming across something like this. And I would say very, very confidently that intercultural differences happen even between two Anglo-Saxons from different areas in the UK.
Okay, thank you. So a deep understanding of the culture, not essential, helpful, but some caveats there about coming into a situation where you think you have that understanding. I think there's lots more unpacking that could be done. It's a big topic, but sensitive to the time here. I do want to get some final thoughts about the future. We're just on the heels of the attempted assassination on Trump, and there's major political polarization, yet along cultural and religious lines as well. What does the future look like for having a culturally oriented approach to mediation? Is this essentially the new norm? Like, should every practitioner be developing these lenses? What do you think? What do you think the future looks like?
So what I see is that unless we abandon, if we or let's put it this way, if we want people to come to mediation, people from every background to come to mediation, we're going to have to develop this culturally oriented mediation, because I believe that we have, in the years that mediation has been developed, that we have kind of abandoned that idea that mediation must be accessible to all. So what I see is there are some folk who will be doing, these very specialized mediations where they're dealing with, let's say, stolen lands and that kind of thing, the original settlers, etc., etc. Those sorts of things. But in terms of what you were just mentioning, the assassination on Trump and so on, I have seen something very interesting recently, that somebody who is Muslim, who is a convicted terrorist, is actually pro-Trump because he doesn't, or he's not responsible for killing Muslims. So these things are so complex. And in terms of the future, I think that's why we are where we are now, because not enough attention has been paid or given to the complexities, the nuances, and of different people, how their perspectives, and not enough safe space for people like Britain First, maybe some groups in America, I won't name them, but some groups in America to feel comfortable to say what their beliefs are in an environment where they know that people won't agree with them, but that they're safe to express those views.
Right. Katrina?
Yeah, I very much agree with what Zaza's saying. I wrote about the UK on purpose because I was doing kind of international mediation work and just realized, like, hey, what's going on at home? And for me, the Brexit divides was a big one. When I came back to the UK after seeing that, I was really struck by the just tension around these issues, around also feeling legitimized because of what politicians said to kind of express this very, like, anti-immigration rhetoric. But actually, I feel like that's because we haven't spoken enough. I don't like the word tolerance, actually. And the word tolerance has been used a long time. The reason I don't like the word is because I feel it doesn't really get to the depths of trying to understand what's behind it. So you just tolerate something, but you don't actually go any deeper with the issues. You live side by side, but you don't speak to each other. There's this kind of assumption for me when I hear that word. And I think what's really important is mediation is just a smaller part of a bigger. I think we need many, many methods of addressing this. I think, having learned also more about mediation, it's really a shame that more conflict resolution skills are not taught through schools, education systems, training courses, that it's not kind of more accepted part of how we even shape our political culture, how we in the UK have a parliament that's set up very divisively with two opposing benches that face each other, and that the disputes have been very much argument, debate based rather than discussion based on the issues. So I think, I see the UK in a lot of ways copying a lot of what the North Americans are doing, and that this is kind of spreading further and further. And I think it's really, we need different methods. We need kind of arts-based methods. We need to bring in, there are amazing filmmakers like Dia Khan, doing documentaries there about how to approach neo-Nazis or, Islamic kind of radicalization. So through documentaries, art, other projects, through education, through mediation, through politics, I think there we can try to build things together. And I think it's too big for any person to kind of take on all of these roles at once. But we're not very good at cooperating across silos, I think, and we're not very good at promoting what mediation can do, what dialogue can do in society. And I think there we do have cultural competence. We have lots of people who can bring in different skills to that. It's not about one person trying to do everything. And many people do come from different identity bases. And really there, again, the work is to know what you can offer, to know how you can work with others to be able to bring about these bigger changes. So I feel like this is becoming more prevalent, unfortunately, because I feel like there is increasing types of polarization in different places around the world and different divisive issues. But it is something that we need to face as a society, not as kind of lone people trying to just do one thing that's unconnected to other things.
Okay, thank you both for your thoughts on that. As well as the fantastic stories and introducing a culturally oriented approach to disputes and mediation. So many thanks to you both.
Thank you so much, Warren.
Thanks for listening. If you want to hear more from international experts digging into a range of topics on conflict, power, and persuasion, subscribe to your favorite podcast app or visit us at cian.org. That's CIIAN.org.